The water had gone cold, my beer had gone warm, and my dark speculations had to be an after effect of the gray. I got out of the tub and popped another sunshine gel cap. The Shamshine Blind is a novel by Paz Pardo which takes place in an alternate 2009 United States. The inciting alteration is the fact that Argentina won the Falklands War, and perhaps more pertinent, won it with chemical warfare. But no, not that kind of chemical warfare. They found and learned to synthesize what they call psychopigments, which are these colorful compounds that when ingested, whether breathed in or injected or even just touched, alter your emotions. And it's not in the way that mood stabilizers work, for instance, but you cannot tell the difference between this love, anger, envy you're feeling from true love, anger, or envy. Remember, your emotions may not be your own. We follow Agent Curtida, an Argentine-American cop who works for the pigment sector. It's decades post-war, and pigments have become a part of daily life, both in a medicinal and in a recreational sense, which of course means there's pigment-based crime. The narrative begins with Curtida on a case regarding Shamshine, a counterfeit version of Sunshine Yellow, which usually induces happiness. But this, of course, gets complicated by further events happening, unfolding, in this case, in other cases around it, as well as some general political movement, all leading to an intense and dangerous investigation. I'll leave some content warnings down in the description for those of you who want them. Starting with writing style. The execution of this as a procedural crime novel is so good. While a lot of this does land on the narrative style, which of course we'll talk about in a little bit, the writing structure does do some heavy lifting. I managed each chapter, did a really good job at tying up enough loose ends that I felt like I accomplished something while reading, while opening enough cans of worms that I really needed to read the next one. And the way Pardo manipulates the pacing is so well done. It's not steady throughout. She clearly took the time to make decisions about when things should slow down to create tension or really allow certain emotions and events to sit with the reader, while being able to pick up the pace during those action-packed scenes that really require that almost, like frantic and just like panicked emotion that you want to feel when things are happening so quickly that you don't know how to react. This led to a great execution of the suspense and tension that you really want from such an emotional but also action-packed novel. There are some absolute banger lines, so much so that I had a really hard time picking my beginning and ending quotes for this video, but I was helped by some of them giving just a little bit too much away about the story. The clever dialogue really adds to the noir part of the story. There's something about clever, witty dialogue that just really adds to that, like, detective noir vibe. Pardo's first-person perspective is quite visceral. Not only were we privy to the mental interiority, but we get a really great sense of the physical feelings of the emotions that Curtida is feeling. And it's really interesting because she works for the pigment sector. She has training in controlling her emotions, even these fake-induced emotions. So being inside a body that is really fighting emotions was really interesting. And because of the subject matter being so focused on emotions, I think being able to execute this immersive feeling of all of the negative and positive emotions was really important. Bringing it around to the narrative style, less about the words and more about kind of the big picture. I find it hard to separate the narrative style and writing style for this one, because the biggest thing that really adds to your experience of the book is the chapter structure, which is both very writing and narrative based. Choosing where to kind of split up the story, as well as executing the, like cliffhangers and things within the writing style. As I said before, Pardo does a really good job of ending chapters by tying up enough stuff that you feel satisfied at the end, but opening up enough questions to have something to think about before you start the next chapter. It feels almost episodic. Like, if you were going to make a TV show out of this, you could easily take, like, a chapter and make that an episode, and you wouldn't have to really change a whole lot about it. The noir vibes are strong from the get-go. We start in, you know, kind of a rundown-looking area, and then we're immediately introduced to a relationship between the two agents and their confidential informant. And it really just goes to add that tone of not a cut and dry morality. There's no perfectly good and perfectly bad, which I think is something that's really strong in noir. The overall themes are dark and moody, and would be even if we weren't dealing with mood-altering pigments. You could easily switch this to being about any sort of drug or other contraband, and the vibes would still work. There are a few world-building elements that I would have loved to see explored further, but this isn't really a fault of the book. They wouldn't really matter in this particular narrative. It just goes to show that Pardo's done a really good job of creating a world, and I just want to know more about it. I will talk more specifically about some of these elements in the spoilers section if that's something you're interested in. Onto the narrative drive. The Shamshine Blind is, I'd say, off-center toward plot-driven versus character-driven. But I think more than character or plot, this is really about evoking thoughts, hence it being in the literary category. When I wasn't actually reading, I definitely found myself thinking more about the pigments and the world than needing to know what happened next in the story. Not that I wasn't super engaged with what was going to happen next, but I was, like, my mind was really exploring the world rather than this particular narrative, which I found kind of interesting. Obviously, the plot and characters are what kept me around. I wouldn't want to read a book that lacks good plot or good characters, because then it's not really a story, it's more just like a thought experiment, which, don't get me wrong, I love a good thought experiment, but it's not really what I'm looking for in a novel. Unless I am. What has really stuck with me since reading it is the pigments. The idea that these substances can alter your mood so specifically and so, like, truly is really interesting. And then the idea of mixing emotions together, other mood-altering substances, how would those work with these pigments? In what ways are these, you know, a great invention, and in what ways could they be really bad? We kind of see a lot of this, but thinking about other ways that it could happen is just, like, really interesting. And the fact that I'm still thinking about it, and it's been over a year since I read the book, I think really goes to show that there's a reason I gave this the rating it got. Both structure and premise land this novel a 5-star rating from me. I love relatively soft sci-fi and speculative fiction, and with this one being really psychology at its core, it's particularly interesting to me. As someone who has both had some formal training in psychology, just a partial undergrad, don't get too excited, and also has dealt with their fair share of strong emotions and mental health episodes, issues, illness, whatever you want to call it, the Shamshine Blind really landed for me. The twists and turns really kept me on my toes, and I'm quite happy that I chose to read a crime novel, especially since I love crime TV so much. This is, like I keep saying, something that I'm really trying to do is branch out into other genres, especially genres that I enjoy in other media, because I have done a lot of classics reading, and somehow my TBR has ended up classics again. But that's besides the point. If you like mental health allegory, noir vibes, and alternate history, The Shamshine Blind is a book for you. All it said was rest well. I turned it over, but there was no indication of who it was from. The skyscrapers gleamed, silver in cold winter sunlight. I didn't know anyone in Iowa. Rest well. Somewhere between get well and rest in peace. Weird thing to write, I said. And now we'll get into some spoilers where I will be very improv-y with a couple of notes to try to remind myself of the thoughts I was having. Again, especially since I did read this over a year ago, and I'm just getting around to this now. While I remember kind of the gist of it, the various specifics are a little bit lost on me. But we'll go off my notes, see what happens. So the first thing that I want to talk about is one of those world building elements that that I wish could have been delved into a little bit further is neuroprofiles. So they kind of mention depression as a pretty big one, and that's partially because depressives, as they call it, are kind of like are people that they seek out to be part of the pigment sector because of the way that their brain works. And then they very briefly mention anxiety as like another possible neuroprofile. I don't think they actually call it a neuroprofile, but I kind of view it as that, which then got me to thinking about things like like autism, ADHD, and then other mental illnesses. Like, what about schizoaffective disorders? What about things that are more like acute? Like, what about postpartum depression? And how those things affect the way that pigments affect you. In addition, they do talk about like neurotypicals, and so I just think like how pigments affect neurotypicals versus all of these other neuroprofiles would be really interesting. So we've had a book in this world that, follows a depressive. So what if we then had a book in this world that follows someone who's autistic? And then you have side characters that have some of these other neuroprofiles. One of the other things that I think is interesting that is kind of related to things that happen in the real world is this idea of emotional miasma. Of course, in the book, this miasma can be physical in the sense that, where there were the magenta attacks. If you drive into those areas now, you can still be affected by the miasma that's left over. What is this? I think your brother sneezed on you. Gross. But what I find really interesting about this is that emotional miasma is something that we encounter in like our own reality. It's obviously not a physical thing, and you'll never see like a pink miasma or pink powder on the walls or anything like that. But you can walk into a room after an argument's been had, and even if these people aren't still arguing, you'll notice. There's also, the idea like you go to a sporting event and the excitement of everyone around you, like that builds in you, and then what about, this is also why riots happen. So kind of the opposite of that is, I don't know, a sports team loses or something political happens and people are all up in arms, and you might not even be up in arms yet, or you might not be really excited to be at this sports game. But you're like infected by the people around you. And so it's interesting to kind of take that to the next level and be able to falsify the like crowd emotion by throwing a pigment or shooting a pigment or injecting a pigment. I'd be really interested, and maybe she's talked about this in an interview. I haven't looked for any interviews, but why pick the colors that she picked for the emotions? Some of them are really obvious as far as kind of what the Western English-speaking world would associate with certain colors. Like we say people have the blues when they're sad, and we say that people are seeing red when they're angry, and we associate yellow with the sun and smiley faces, so of course that's happy. But some of the other colors I think are less obvious to the average person, and I wonder if she explored color theory, like psychoanalysis type color theory, or if she just went off her own vibes, if she looked into metaphysical color associations. I tried to get a list of them without having to go through myself so that I could kind of like look at them and see if the colors all still resonated with the emotions that they're assigned in the novel. But I got sidetracked and then forgot to do it. Let me take a few minutes. Let's see if we can find the poster, because I think it is written out kind of differently, so I think maybe it's hard to flip through a book that has this many tags in it, which is kind of another reason I'm glad I don't do my tags like this, and it's definitely early on in the book. I probably marked it, but I don't know what I would have marked it with. Oh, I think I found it. Yeah, okay, so we can at least look at, like, the, like, kind of, like, main few. So it has slate gray ennui, which I think makes sense. Ennui is kind of, like, just, like, a general feeling of, like, eh. And I feel like gray is, you know, as dull as it gets. Cerulean is guilt. This is one that I didn't really get. Cerulean is like it's in the blue-green family. And I don't know what I would make guilt, but I don't know if it's cerulean. Deepest blue is memory wipe. Oh, that was another interesting thing. This is kind of going off of what I'm currently talking about, but deepest blue, the after effects of, like, too much deepest blue felt very much like, somewhere between, like, dementia and, like, PTSD, and kind of, like, fugue state, which is kind of interesting. Envy green is jealousy or covetousness, which I think makes sense. That's one, like, green with envy is, like, a regular, like, saying, so that one just kind of makes sense. And then sunshine yellow is happiness, and then magenta is obsession, and I think I like that one. Because magenta's, like, a very intense color of pink, and I think obsession is a very intense passion or love. And I definitely think, like, reds and pinks are in that passion and love. Obviously using red for it doesn't make nearly as much sense because I think it's called, like, bull red or something like that in this. It very obviously meant for anger, but having, like, one of the most intense looking pinks as obsession makes a lot of sense to me. So I do just wonder, like, how she decided on which colors were going to be used for which emotions, especially the ones that are less obvious. If you have recollections of some of the other colors, because I know orange is used. I'm not sure, like, none of the others. So red wasn't on the list, and orange wasn't on the list. I'm pretty sure orange was used. Orange to me is, like, a very, like, creativity based color. And so I'm curious, like, would that be, like, some sort of enlightenment, which is kind of purple in this. Purple is the pigment that we look at the most because we have multiple different shades of purple, and therefore, like, all of those emotions are kind of, like, tied together, which also makes me think, like, a powder pink would be, like, maybe used for friendship, even though I would probably, I mean, orange is also kind of a friendship color to me, but so is yellow. And then another, like, really interesting thing to even more consider is when you mix these pigments together, technically they'd make new pigments. So when you mix anger and happiness together, which would be red and yellow, what does that mean for orange? I don't think that's actually what happened. Again, I wish I could remember what orange is, but I just don't. But yeah, again, obviously this premise has really stuck with me. I've always really enjoyed kind of, like, abstract things like that. Like, I love to come up with ideas that are based on, like, the elements, or you know, the deadly sins, or different climates and what those mean, but, like, on an abstract level. Like, what does hot, dry places mean? Which is obviously, like, a desert, but, like, I don't know. That was just one that I used for a project that I did quite a while ago, which is Dungeon 23, so I did it in 2023. And I created like prompts for each month, and climate was one of them. Anyways, that's really besides the point. Yeah, the only other thing that I have in my spoilers list is like a line issue. And I want to know if it's a typo. And I'm sure, like, unless you also have the experience of working in a kitchen or in a restaurant, this might not have, like, stood out at all. But there was a line that uses the term lunch crush, and I've never heard somebody say a lunch crush before. There are two other words that fit there for me. The most common would be like the lunch rush, the dinner rush, the post-church rush, or like a lunch crunch. I guess like I could see being used, but it's not really the same thing. Like it really should have been a rush. And it's the weirdest thing to nitpick. But I did make a note about it, so I thought that was an interesting one to bring up just for all of my restaurant people. Yeah, I'm sure there's more that I could or would talk about, so if you've read this and there's something that you kind of want like my take on, let me know in the comments and I'll respond. I would ask you to like put spoiler as like the first word in your message if you are going to talk about stuff that's spoilers, just for the people who are trolling through the comments and don't want spoilers. But yeah, I'm sure that there are more things that could be like brought to mind, or just questions and thoughts you have about the premise in general. I'd be really interested to discuss those. So again, if you like mental health allegory, noir vibes, and alternate history, The Shamshine Blind is a book for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you had fun. I had a blast. Catch you next time. Bye! The cats are causing trouble again. What's new? Is it written in first person? I forgot how that sentence started. Oh, what's in your fur? Where was I in the script? If you like mental... Oh.